One of the biggest differences between Marvel and DC is that Marvel has always been adamant on featuring their heroes in real-life cities. Marvel's New York City is one of the comic giant's most prominent settings, being home to a slew of iconic superheroes and villains. While we've seen it depicted on the big screen in the MCU multiple times now, Marvel fans were introduced to NYC in a brand new way thanks to the recently released Spider-Man game for the PS4. It's an open world, and one that allows you to web-sling your way throughout a Manhattan that feels exceptionally realistic. It's kind of a love letter to the city. Some critics of the game have even pointed out that they were able to find their old apartment buildings while swinging around and checking out the game's digs. So today we're counting down some of the similarities between the game's version of the city and the real-life one, with our list of the top 10 ways Marvel's Spider-Man gets New York right. Let's jump in. Starting us off at number 10, the layout. As we mentioned in our intro, the game takes place in Manhattan. It doesn't branch out to the other parts of New York outside of Manhattan, but that being said, it is pretty darn massive. The layout of the city is a pretty good rendition too, although you'll find that many of the bigger landmarks in the city are scaled down slightly. Take a look at this comparison between the game's lower Manhattan and the real life one. It's a pretty good match in terms of shape and layout, although it is missing a few key elements. But more on that in a sec. You'll notice that the surrounding areas, while inaccessible, are pretty spot on. The surrounding bridges, including the Brooklyn Bridge, the Williamsburg Bridge, and the Manhattan Bridge, are all present, with the biggest difference being that the approximation of space between the bridges varies ever so slightly from real life. The Statue of Liberty is visible exactly where it needs to be, south of Manhattan, and right by Ellis Island, which also appears in the game. Now in real life, the two aren't actually next to each other as they are in the game, but considering the scaling down that's consistent throughout the title, it makes sense. Speaking of islands, Governor's Island also makes an appearance in the game, and its recreation is pretty spot on too. Up next, number 9, Battery Park. You probably noticed one of the biggest differences in our last number in terms of Lower Manhattan's layout is that the ferry dock is missing. Battery Park, which leads out into the iconic Staten Island ferry terminal, has a pretty accurate depiction in the game, although it is scaled down ever so slightly and is missing the terminal. That makes sense considering developers Insomniac wouldn't want to prompt players into believing that they could set sail off to a new part of the city that is unavailable on the map. That being said, you can still spot the ferries sailing around the harbor right next to Battery Park, which is a nice little detail. Where do they go though? Someone please track down one of those ferries ASAP. Up next, number 8, the United Nations building. Certain buildings within the game are almost identical models of their real-life counterparts, including this number. The United Nations headquarters, which is along the East River, is quite the memorable structure and is pretty accurate in the game. The UN's headquarters are in New York for reals, having been there since 1952, the same year that the building's construction was complete. Aside from this location, the UN actually has a few other regional headquarters, one in Geneva, one in Vienna, and one in Nairobi. Moving on to number 7, the Flatiron Building. The Flatiron Building, located at 175 Fifth Avenue, is one of the most memorable landmarks in Manhattan. It's often considered to be a quintessential symbol of the city, and the surrounding district is even named after it. So of course it's featured in the Spider-Man game, and it's also located across the street from Spider-Man's version of Madison Square Park, which unfortunately isn't the most accurate recreation, but still pretty neat, all things considered. Up next at 6, Times Square. At the beginning of the game, you sort through one of the most iconic places in New York City, Times Square. The hustle and bustle of Times Square is interrupted by the story. The police are hunting down Wilson Fisk and dealing with all of his goons, who, side note, when you pay a visit to Wilson's building, it kinda looks awfully reminiscent of the Trump Tower in terms of like font and whatnot. Spider-Man's Times Square is chock full of large screens and bustling people, and feels quite like the real thing when you're on the ground, but is still pretty awesome to look at while you swing your way through it from the buildings above. Up next, number 5, the Guggenheim. Swinging through the city and want to check out some of the most important cultural features New York has to offer? Well, head on over to the Guggenheim. The Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum is available for you to check out in the game, although like many of the other landmarks in the game, you can't stroll in and check out their collection of Impressionist, Post-Impressionist, and other early contemporary art that the museum famously boasts. But from the outside, it's still cool as hell, and is a really good recreation of the landmark too. Unfortunately, not all of New York's iconic museums got the replica treatment in the game like the Guggenheim did. The Metropolitan Museum of Art has been replaced by a new building that is significantly less aesthetically appealing, and more modern. This replacement is called the MMOCA, the Manhattan Museum of Contemporary Art, which, for those of you unfamiliar with the city, doesn't actually exist. Moving on to number 4, the One World Trade Center. One of the most recent and poignant additions to the New York skyline is the One World Trade Center building, so naturally it appears in the Spider-Man game, except it has a slight redesign at its top. That being said, it's also the tallest building in the game, just like its real-life counterpart in Manhattan, and you can even climb your way to its top, which is likely why there is a bit of a redesign for it in the game. Insomniac had to be spider-friendly, guys. Up next at 3, the St. Patrick's Cathedral. Another amazing recreation of the game is St. Patrick's Cathedral. It's almost identical to the real thing. The game really nails the neo-Gothic structure, located on the east side of 5th between 50th and 51st Streets. It's also directly across the road from Rockefeller Center, which doesn't get as nice of a treatment in the game as the cathedral does, skipping out on a few key details. But hey, the cathedral itself is a bit of a show stealer, so I think we can forgive Insomniac for that. Up next at 2, Central Park. While many of the famous landmarks in the game have been scaled down to some extent, one aspect of Manhattan has remained just as large and sprawling as it is in real life. The game's Central Park is just as massive, and as some fans who have snapped photos of it have noted, you can't actually manage to fit the whole thing into a single photo, which is amazing. In terms of terrain, it's a really close fit, and the layout is very similar to the real thing. And finally, in our number 1 spot, the Empire State Building. Early on in the game, the landmark mechanic is introduced to you as a means of helping establish points on your map. You pay the Empire State Building a visit and snap a photo of it. And it's pretty epic. Unlike the One World Trade Center, developers stayed as accurate as possible to the real-life structure, which makes sense considering how iconic it is. The Chrysler Building is also right next door to it on the skyline, as it should be, and it's also quite accurate compared to the real thing. Alright, there we have it, friends. What other parts of Manhattan have you explored in the game that feels just like the real thing? Give us a shout in those comments below and let us know. If you dug this video, spread the love and hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe to our channel. We've also been doing lots of Let's Plays of Spider-Man on this channel and our sister channel Top 10 Nerds, so be sure to head on over there and check them out. In the meantime though, thanks for watching everybody. I'll catch you all in the next video.